Hey guys, Dead Toro here. Today I wanted to talk about something that I've been using for a few years now to essentially play Devil's May Cry. And so one of the things that I use is this, my custom controller. Okay, so I'm going to get down to the nitty-gritty, dirty details as soon as possible. Alright, so to start off with, this isn't the original DualShock that I have used. That one broke a long time ago. This is a modified version of a new one that I acquired sometime within this year. You'll notice that there is some deformations on the sides of the controllers. Well, the deformation is created through the use of polymorph plastic. Now, polymorph is not always going to just stick onto other plastics. It does very well. What I actually did to essentially adhere this, I'm going to describe it somewhat in the video as we move along, but if you're wondering what the materials are that you are seeing, this is polymorph plastic. It's a very moldable substance. It is non-toxic, very safe to essentially use for essentially some custom additions. I even considered at one point in time getting a DualShock and making it have the exact same design on both sides of the controller, so that way I could comfortably play shooters and access all the buttons without really, losing out too much. So let's get into this. So this is a DualShock controller. Before I was using this, the process started off originally as something like this. It's a very strange looking form, right? But this piece right here would pop on to the bottom left hand side of the DualShock controller, and then this right here was essentially a pinky support beam. So this would act as a support beam, as well as this back end here would also act as a support, because holding the controller in this awkward position causes it to slide, and it just makes it harder to do tapping combos, crazy combos essentially. So to get over this, originally it was just one piece. Then I used some more polymorph that I had to create this other edition. And the tabs that are here are not the same ones, but the aluminum strips that I use to create these tabs to press the various D-pad buttons at one point in time were in a similar fashion right here at the end and right here at the bottom across to essentially touch the D-pad, which would have been in roughly this area here. So this was the first model. It was not a failure, it did work, but it wasn't comfortable. I did this originally so I could claw grip and access all the D-pad buttons as easily as possible because of style switching. Originally, I played claw grip for many years, and the reason why this came about was because of that. I played claw grip, and claw grip over time will hurt your hand. You will start to feel it in the back of your hand, and I do not want to develop carpal tunnel because I would like to play DMC for as long as I possibly can. Therefore, I had to come up with a solution, and this was the temporary solution for a time being. And it did its job fairly well, but it was not as good as I would want it to be. And this is a lot better, but admittedly, it does not meet my exact desired standards. If I actually did have the ability to make my custom controller, it wouldn't have tabs. The buttons would be located completely different. And I might as well show a picture, a little drawing of what I would prefer, or how I would like to experiment with controllers in the future to create a better freestyle combo experience for the Devil's May Cry series as Dante And hopefully one day Vergil, who knows, maybe he gets style switching. And in 5, he does have access to the D-pad in a way to modify the doppelganger to certain speeds. So you could use this setup that I'm going to present as a Dante-Vergil sort of thing. And thanks to mods, also narrow, since he happens to be, through the use of mods, able to use the D-pad with his own pseudo-style switching, since Cyan's mod, as well as, you know, Hitchhiker, all these other people like Dante, and thanks to them, the D-pad is functional for at least 2 characters, so this can somewhat work. It's not impossible to press diagonally like this, right? So yeah, this is very useful to some degree, but it's not perfect, right? Now, diving in further, what we have here may just seem like a few modifications to a standard DualShock controller. Oh, you know, some polymorph and some tabs so you can access the D-pad. But in reality, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. I'd have to open it up to show you, and I don't want to go through the hassle, so I'm just going to explain what is going on with my DualShock 4. So, right now, the other side, the inner shell of the DualShock 4, I drilled holes using a Dremel in strategic locations to essentially make it so when I boiled the polymorph and it was soft, I could push it through the gaps and have it wrap around. See, the way polymorph works is if you heat it up with any heat, that's how it becomes soft again. So I have a heat gun. I can always, if I ever wanted to, just remove all of this and continue my experimentation. So I would have to remove the shells, take the heat gun, and slowly work off the plastic. You don't want to do it all at once, because this right here, the DualShock shell itself, is also plastic, which means it is prone to warping through heat or cold or other factors. But if I take my time, I can keep the shell in its proper shape while at the same time removing this excess. But moving on. So I softened the polymorph and I pushed it through the drill holes that were scattered throughout strategic locations on the DualShock shell on both sides. The reason why I did that is because if it's on the other side and I put another layer on it, right, then it will create a stronger hold. Instead of having to bind to the surface layer of plastic, it can bind to the plastic that has a hook around the holes that I drilled. Okay? So that is the first little piece of modification that allows for this setup. Now the second thing is, all you have to do with these aluminum tabs, this one is bent roughly, actually, I also want to point out, I did the same thing at the bottom. You'll notice that this is right here. I'm going to talk about this little modification right here. This one up here is self-explanatory, so I can access the 2 other directional buttons. Okay? This right here is primarily there for comfort. So you'll notice if you're holding claw grip, as you can see here, before my finger would be the support, as well as the back brace right here, right? But this little mod right here, okay, counts for the gap that is created when you are using claw grip. As you can see here, for me to comfortably hold the controller, I have to have my hand in an unnatural position. What my hand wants to do, and what would be more natural, is to have my pinky finger roughly here. So, basically, this allows for that comfort level to be achieved, right? It makes it easier to grip, and it gives you better handle of the controller, since your ring finger isn't the only finger that is supporting the controller. The way that it is positioned, the ring finger actually does a good job of supporting the controller, as you can see here. I'm only using one finger and essentially the palm of my thumb to hold it. So the ring finger on your left hand is the support beam, it no longer needs the back end or the pinky support. The pinky support is honestly just extra and it's for comfort. You'll notice that I have both ends separate, so you can make these modifications and essentially have a complete split, so you can open up the controller again if you ever need to make modifications on the inside, because there is a few slight modifications and experimentations on the inside. I'll get into that in a bit. But essentially you can access both shells and you can remove and also add more polymorph plastic as you go along. Now then, so with these tabs here, I just want to point something out. This tab was bent around completely and has been held in place by the polymorph, essentially hooking into itself like this. This piece, on the other hand, may be a little misleading. The support for this aluminum tab actually is an L shape that I cut out using metal shearing scissors with an aluminum sign that I happen to have as material. So this one is a really long L. It goes across. You will have to bend the piece till it's flat against the side of the controller, and then bend this around and have it lightly touch the left directional pad. You'll notice that it is bent in a somewhat weird shape. You want to get this little bend right here as tight as possible, or you may accidentally press the left directional button when you don't want to. What you're trying to do isn't squeeze, although you can. What you're trying to do to press the left button is move across with your hand, like so, right? Unfortunately, this isn't perfect. I have done a better version of this in the past, but no matter what, it's not the most comfortable thing, but it's still far more comfortable than having to claw on my own, okay? So now let's talk about positioning. What this positioning allows us to do is essentially access all the style buttons, essentially change weapons freely, and also access Devil Trigger, which is usually either L2 or R2 for myself, as well as I usually use Lock On for L2 or R2 because it's far more comfortable to hold down. And it does give you space to essentially tap, right? If you have Lock On the left-hand side of the DualShock 4, and you have support, what it allows you to do is essentially freely tap as quickly as possible to perform crazy combos in DMC3. So essentially you do want your lock on the left hand side. Now I could put lock on onto L1, but I'm just a little bit more comfortable with changing weapons with L1. It's a preference thing. There is a downside to having lock on L2 or R2. It makes doing reversals a bit more difficult, but unless you're doing a speed run where reversals are required, it's not as big of a deal as you may think. So, you know, it's not impossible to do it either with L2 or R2. It's just a bit more difficult because you don't want to press it all the way down, right? You want to do it lightly so it registers. The one thing that I don't have on this controller right now, there's actually a few things, but one of them that I want to point out at the moment is the L2 trigger. You'll notice that this is how I hold the controller essentially, right? Claw grip. And I can't really comfortably access L2. In fact, if I use my middle finger, I risk pressing down on the D-pad. To overcome this, what I actually did, and I had to remove because it wasn't comfortable yet and not to my liking, was I had aluminum wire running through the L2 from the other side. I used it as a tab to access with my pinky finger, since I have so much support with my ring finger, the L2 button. And this is one thing that I've been lazy about, but I am going to get to as soon as I can, because it is very convenient to be able to lock on the left-hand side for the reasons that I have described. Although I might make L2 weapon switch if I do speed runs, and I will make L1 my lock-on, because honestly I can freely move my forefinger throughout the D-pad as well as my thumb while holding on to L1. Another piece of tech that I want to show you, or another modification that I want to show you guys, is it doesn't, you may not notice it from far away. If if you look up close to the controller, you'll find some aluminum wire that has been threaded through some holes strategically throughout the DualShock 4. These little loops are actually for twine, like such that, though I haven't really been able to test it out very much because I do not have a Switch, so I don't have the Switch version of DMC 3 Special Edition to do some labs for my modifications. The twine would go through the loops and be connected to some of my fingers, right? Like my thumb on the left-hand side would be connected through this loop and down through this loop right here and down to here. Or it really doesn't matter. I don't actually need the bottom loop. It's just in case the string were to get caught up on something. But it seems I don't need this bottom loop. But that was the original plan. It goes from the analog to the bottom loop and connects to a ring that I have on my thumb, which it's no longer a theory. I have tested the ability to pull it away. I can comfortably access the L3 analog stick, and at the same time, when it is necessary to use the weapon wheel, I can hold L1 and pull like this with my thumb to essentially pull the analog to the side and hit Beowulf. I want to use this in some way, shape, or form to at least do some style stuff, but maybe it can help with speed running. So I have been working on my design. I had to drill holes at the top of the analog stick on the right hand side, so R3, so that way I could loop some aluminum wire through the analog to make it so I can hook it. It does actually hold up pretty well. The other strips right here, the other loops, are so I can access the right analog stick by performing certain movements, right? If I pull left with my thumb on the left hand, and I pull down and to the right with a string that is looped around a ring or rings that are looped around my ring finger and pinky finger on my right hand, I should be able to get it to go downward. And so another thing that I've been wanting to do is make it so when I pull up or do some kind of motion like this, I can get it to go straight up. So this is some of the experimentation that I've been doing, and I haven't completed it because of certain situations. I'm currently unemployed and I am looking for work, but I haven't been able to find it. Hopefully I find something soon, but I digress. That's personal stuff. We're currently talking about DMC and this DualShock controller that I use to play it. So, I did some inner modifications and I'm going to go through them right now. As you can see here, this one, even though it sticks out, it is technically an inner modification. What I had to do for this little tab, which is the options, the share button, right? I had to open up the controller, take the piece and drill it with the thinnest bit that I had with my Dremel from the other side on both ends. If you can see the start button, there should be 2 holes, and I looped some aluminum wire, heated up some polymorph just a tiny bit, and then I attached the polymorph to the loops, and then I also attached a little bit of polymorph on the other sides after trying to bend the aluminum wire so it holds in place. That way it can stick out and I can easily press this button right here, which makes it easier for taunt or style switching, which honestly if I had it my way, put taunt on left on the D-pad, take this right here and just remove it because it's nice. I want to make it better, but it's not where it's at for me currently. It's not as ideal, right? But take that, remove it, and then just put taunt on left, and whenever you need to taunt, you can either, press with your forefinger or move your thumb inward like this and press left and you'll be able to taunt. That is optimization, and that's something that I've been considering of doing, just getting rid of this tab. But at the end of the day, this tab is still useful, and I can also access time with it with minimal effort, and I don't have to take my thumb off the left stick. So I'm debating on whether keeping the left tab for the left D-pad, but it has its uses being there. It is not completely useless. It's just for comfort reasons I might get rid of it. It's not for efficiency reasons. For efficiency reasons, it's technically better to have the left tab because I can always just press by doing this motion, a very slight motion, and I can hit left. At the same time, I can access, with both hands on, I can access this, I can access this. Pretty much everything is within my reach. And so even this, technically you can't use it right now, but this is accessible. Everything on the left-hand side is accessible by the left hand with as little effort as possible. So I made the holes on the right-hand side for the start button, but I didn't actually put anything else because start isn't really required for the run and it doesn't get in the way. But I put the holes just in case I come up with a reason for why I would need the button to extend outward. If you look at this here, you would think that the options button, it's one of those things where, oh, you don't need it to stick out, but you actually kind of do. In the middle of doing combos, right? Pressing this button right here and finding it, I'm actually having trouble right now, but to be fair, it's a little bit harder to see with this, and I do have gloves which remove my senses, but from my experience, even with this off and my gloves off, finding and pressing this is harder. But now, with this modification, it stands out and it stands up. It makes it easier to find quickly and press. So, it is an actual useful modification, and it is one that helps optimize your gameplay. Another mod that I made, this one is specifically for DMC 5 because of my experience with it, but it also can work with everything else. The D-pad has been cut into 4 individual pieces through the use of a Dremel with a saw bit on it to make as tight of a cut as possible so it doesn't end up slipping out, and as you can see, everything is working properly. So it's been cut into 4 pieces, and I did this because I was experiencing something while playing DMC 5 where I would press Swordmaster and it would go back to Trickster. Or I would press Trickster and it would go back to Swordmaster. The D-pad happens to be on a singular piece with a pivot point on it, and this pivot point, when you press a direction, rolls the D-pad. It makes it easier for the D-pad to roll across the surface to essentially activate. The problem is, with that sort of system, if I press up on the D-pad somewhat off, the DualShock could register that the right button has been pressed because it's just slightly off. You'd think that this wouldn't matter, but because of the way that I play, when I was pressing Swordmaster and Trickster to do my sword trick swords, they kept messing up. I thought it was because I did not practice the skill set enough, or because I am like rusty. But eventually I noticed that it wasn't because of that. It was because of the issue that I was discussing just now. And so a way to test it, to prove that what I was experiencing was happening to me specifically on my DualShock 4, but at the same time, it could have happened to other people, I don't know, I'm only talking about my experience right here. I would hold down up on the D-pad, and I would wiggle it like this, and when I did that, it would switch to Swordmaster, and it would switch to Trickster. And because of that, I decided on how do I remove this flaw. I can't mod the game to fix whatever happened. I'm not smart enough, or at least I'm not skilled enough in modding to be able to do that and figure out what's causing it. But at the very least, I can troubleshoot the controller, because it is a hardware issue, at least in my mind, at its source, because when I would wiggle up on the D-pad, it would switch as if I pressed right. So, I removed the pivot point at the center of the D-pad and I cut it into 4 pieces so that way it could still fit in and not shake too much or move out of place. And as you can see, it holds up pretty well. So that is another slight modification. This over here was me experimenting. I want to show you something. So you'll notice a hole in my DualShock 4, and you'll notice holes in my circle button, right? So this modification did work, but because I don't have enough skill to make a good mold, what ended up happening was the modification I would make would get stuck. So let me explain what it was and why it wasn't working, even though I already said just now that why it wasn't working. So the reason this was here is because I shoot with circle, right? And I wanted to make it so I could do my shotgun cancels a bit easier, right? Because it's not too difficult, but it's uncomfortable from square to circle. So I drilled a hole through the center of the controller, and I looped some aluminum wire through a circle, and there was a little bit of a hatch. In fact, this circle right now is missing one of its tabs that holds it in place because I used the aluminum wire on the other end, right? So imagine something like this. One end on the top, it gets looped through, and then it goes through the bottom, and that aluminum wire acts as a tab. Then it goes back up through the hole with a button that I made out of polymorph that did fit and slide through the other hole perfectly. And because there's so little distance between the two pieces, the circle button and the makeshift button, when I would press down on the middle button, it actually would drop the circle button because there wasn't enough distance to make it so the aluminum wire had slack, right? So without that slack, it actually does act as one piece. The problem was occasionally the center button would get stuck, and so I couldn't see the internal problem, so I don't know exactly why it was getting stuck. Clearly, what I think it was, the inside of the DualShock controller with the square, circle, X, triangle button has a sort of X with some circular ends, but what I needed was something to surround the makeshift button so that way it holds in place and has no room to move anywhere else. Similar to the circle button, you'll notice that if you were to open this shell, you'd have something surrounding the circle button, the triangle button, square, and X, essentially plastic, keeping it from moving out of place. So it can't wiggle out of place, it can't pop out, right? So what I need to do is get the polymorph to make a circle with a bit of a slip for the tab that connects to circle, right? And that way, when I press down on it, they'll both go down, be one button. For anyone who's wondering, would this sacrifice the ability to do gun cancels with Royal Guard? Not in the slightest, okay? So this would make it a bit easier to do shotgun canceling if you're above an enemy. But the circle button, even though it has the aluminum wire, I can extend the plastic to go over the circle button and be one solid piece with a little bit of a gap in between to make sure that you can still press the circle button. If this is accomplished, circle button will be a rectangular oval that goes across into the center in between X and triangle. But at the end of the day, this little modification here is not its own button. It's not like the thing that activates circle is in the center now. It's actually still on the left-hand side. So if you have Royal Guard and you use style like me, X and circle, right? X being style, circle being shoot. All you have to do is just press X and circle. You can still even slide with no problem because everything will be tight and held in place. So we have X and circle. You can still do your guard cancels, right? You can still do your gun cancels. You can do shotgun cancels a bit easier. You have square and triangle for certain weapons, it will make your canceling easier. Square and X can be canceled easier. And so that is just one of the many modifications that I am experimenting with to try and make the most optimal and cheap DualShock 4 DMC style switching controller. And so one more thing is with DS4, you can set this right here to be a button. And one of the things that I wanted to do one day and make it so this piece right here, that is one solid piece, if I can find a safe way to drill through it, I want to make something in this corner pop out so it's somewhat leveled with square over here, because you can do cancels this way, but it's not easy to do it the other way. In fact, it shouldn't be done that way. So one thing that you can do to overcome your shotgun canceling, if you have DS4, you can put your shotgun right here and essentially do this. You'll just, when you're locked on, let's just pretend we're locked on, you trick up with Dante, okay? Then all you have to do is square to touch sensor bar, and you can still do your jump cancels, your shotgun cancels. This is one thing that I was thinking as an optimization, so I don't have to change this. But in the event that I need this for something else, I do still want to complete the experimentation process with this right here. Because if I do complete this, then I have one extra button available. One extra button available. If a feature comes out, or there's some new tech that gets discovered, or anything, that one extra button creates possibilities. Possibilities that can benefit the DMC community. And so, I am going to continue the process, little by little, of developing this controller so it can be as optimal as possible for DevilMayCry style switching as Dante and Nero and even Vergil. So, let's just recap. There are internal modifications, there are external modifications, there are some features that are accounted for various versions, right? So this right here, the pulley system, is for DMC3 because of the weapon wheel and the ability to access it through the analog. You can style switch with relative ease. Lock-on is easily available. Lock-on is easily available. Weapon switching is easily available. If, let's say, you wanted to do weapon switch canceling while grounded on enemies in DMC3 freestyle, what you would do is you're not going to be able to reach with your thumb like this unless you have very large hands. You'll make a slight movement like this. Hold L1 and access with the right hand, okay, the left stick. Now press triangle and get used to the timing of moving the analog stick back and forth between Cerberus and Agni and Rudra, I think would be the best combination. But you can do Rebellion and Cerberus, or you can do Beowulf and Rebellion, or if you time it, you can do Beowulf, Rebellion, Cerberus, Agni and Rudra, or you can do Beowulf, Rebellion, Cerberus, Agni and Rudra by performing this motion and slowly going through the weapon wheel, right, while pressing triangle. That is how you will weapon switch cancel for the freestyle category. I've done this myself, and so this is a little tech development that I am adding to the world so people can optimize their gameplay, especially speedrunners. So just think about that, right? That's how you're going to go about it, okay? Aside from that, I do want to point out something else that I forgot to mention that has crossed my mind, okay? With L2, right, there is some distance between the controller being pressed and it being a tab. So an optimization that I'm going to do as I fix this little tab here is make it So there is a trigger stop. So when I press down with my pinky, I will only have to press it ever so slightly. So L2 will instantly, due to the trigger stop, be pressed. Hopefully that will solve the burst stinger problem, so speedrunners who consider using this setup primarily for the freestyle run of, at least for the freestyle run, will be able to have another little optimization for the run, for the speed run, as well as for freestyling. So little by little, I am developing this controller style to cater to the DevilMayCry community. And with time, I think this will be a style of play that will be adopted by people who do not want to experience carpal tunnel and want to optimize their playability. And so, you know, I think this is the innovation that the community is looking for. I've been working on this for a very long time and optimizing it as best I could with the ability and means that I have. I'm not skilled enough to make modifications on a level where, you know, I can essentially have buttons on the sides, you know, or at the bottom. I can't make custom buttons. I can't move the analog over here so it's easier to access for speed runs, right? I can't move the analog to the left-hand side. What I would want to do, by the way, this is another piece of information for anybody who wants to help optimize this controller style. Moving this over here would actually make it better for the freestyle run as well as for styling, because it would be easier to switch in the middle of a combo. You need the right stick over here. In fact, if I do this, I can, right? I can switch in the middle of a combo and cancel at the same time. It's not very comfortable though. And so one of the things about efficiency is ease of use. Things that are efficient tend to be user-friendly. Things that big companies, right? They happen to make their things as user-friendly as possible. And so they seemingly don't run things as efficiently as you may think whenever they encounter mistakes. But they didn't get to be big by making big mistakes. They only make small mistakes. To be fair, this should be taken with a grain of salt. But the mistakes that they do make are not big. And so one of the things that a lot of big companies do is create ease of use. And ease of use is what allows runners to optimize their runs. And so this controller, if I had the right analog over here, it would make specifically DMC3 Switch Edition easier, specifically for runs, and at the same time specifically for freestyling and, you know, just combos in general. But I don't have the skills and I don't know how to. I don't have my solder on me. Oh, I do have my solder on me, but I have to give it to somebody. It's a gift at this point, so I won't have it on me. But even if I did, I wouldn't know how to solder the analog off. Move it over here, although I have some ideas. Put it into place, and then get the wires to get soldered onto the analog, and then moved all the way across to the original positions of the board for the DualShock 4. If this was done, right, it would make doing the switch runs so much easier. By the way, I do want to point out, since you probably just thought, you can't use a DualShock 4 for switch runs. I currently use, thanks to a friend of mine, an adapter that allows for this controller. And so if it wasn't for him, my co-op partner, Va_yo, I wouldn't be able to use this controller. So thank you to him. Just a quick shout out. He's a very close friend of mine. We have been playing co-op for years, since we first started talking about Devil's May Cry through just coincidence. And so pretty much use an adapter. That's how I access this for the Switch run. And so I prefer the DualShock, so I'm going to use the DualShock. He uses a Switch controller, which is fine. So optimization and efficiency is the goal with this controller here. Not specifically for one thing, but to be as versatile as possible for the video game series Devils May Cry. And so I'm happy to share this with all of you, and I hope that it was informative. And if you take an interest in creating one of these for yourself, I can't post a full tutorial because I would have to buy another controller and then do the process and film it. But what I would say is, one, I am not condoning this. You make this at your own risk. There is some risk factors when modifying your controller with the tools that I was using. Essentially drills, Dremels, saws, for slight details, polymorph plastic, which you have to boil, or you can heat up with a heat gun, though you're going to want to boil it, trust me. Only use the heat gun to essentially remove slowly the plastic. I don't condone you making one of these, but if you do decide to, hopefully you can make some optimizations that I haven't either thought of or completed yet. And, definitely show me if you do make some optimizations, because I'm very interested. And like I said, I want to create the best DMC controller possible. If I could afford making a custom DMC controller from essentially hiring modders and people with skill sets that I don't have, I would love that, but I don't have those means, so I'm working within my limitations. And that's all you can do, and that's my advice to people who are struggling sometimes through life, comparing themselves to other people. Do not compare yourself to other people. It's just not worth your time. All you have to do is work within your parameters, work within your limitations, and you can achieve small things little by little. In fact, Waifu recently did a speedrun, and it was thanks to a new innovation called Gigapede Skip that he was able to get sub 1 hour for the Dante run. He is the first to do sub 1 hour for the Dante run. So I congratulate him on that, and I think it helps make my point that little optimizations here and there create big end results. And so that is the thing that I am trying to achieve with my custom controller. I'm trying to optimize it to the best of my abilities to essentially be a comfortable and efficient DMC all-around controller. And so I hope that you found this video informative. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I will try my best to answer them. I am not used to getting comments, so I may forget that people might comment, but I will try to remember and get to you as soon as possible. And hopefully if you make one of these, feel free to show it to me. I am actually so interested in optimizations for Devils May Cry. I may not have been vocal throughout the years. I've been very quiet in the community. I usually just stop by Discords and look what's going on. I don't talk very much. I'm just trying to get out there more and become a little bit more confident in myself. And so I'm putting myself in situations that I'm not necessarily naturally comfortable with. Though I have a personal philosophy of forcing yourself into situations that are uncomfortable so you can progress and grow. I've been doing this for most of my life when I discovered that you have to struggle to learn something. Like, I used to skateboard. It was what taught me discipline, and so skateboarding, you have to do a trick over and over and over again until eventually you get it. And then once you do get it, it doesn't stop there. You have to continue to do it until it becomes consistent and you no longer fall and hit the ground. And that helped develop my personal philosophy of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations to grow. And so making this was a bit of a pain, but I did it and it helped me grow. And so making little adjustments here and there in DMC helped other people grow. And all I want is for this game to be optimized as much as possible, and for the community to grow and become bigger and better than it already is. Because I've been playing DMC since I was roughly 7 years old. Since the first release, I've bought pretty much all of them on release, except maybe 4, but I did get it. I didn't have the money for it. I did manage to get it eventually, I did manage to play it when it released through family members, friends, and just people who had the game. So thank you for watching, and I hope this video was fun and informative for you. Let's keep optimizing this game. Later.
From the first son of Sparta, may you acquire foolishness and joy. This is power.